You know, Alex, I am a Canadian citizen. Here we go again. And for a long time, all I knew about American government was something I learned from a cartoon I saw on Saturday morning. It was called Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill.
I remember that. It was a cute little cartoon Bill on the steps of the Capitol. And then the bill, I think his name was Bill, would go to committee. And then it gets voted out of the committee and goes to the floor of the House and the Senate.
I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be alone. I hope and pray that they will. But today I am still just a bill. It's amazing because it was the entire U.S. government in 3 minutes, flat, or so I thought. Last week, I was down in Washington, D.C., in the Senate specifically, and I'm here to tell you, Schoolhouse Rock is a lie.
All right.
It is a lie, the whole thing. So, for instance, we just heard how they talked about, the senators debate. And, there's actually, you see two guys in suits debating. But what this did not tell you is that in the U.S. Senate, there's a vote before the debate. There is a debate, an actual debate about whether or not anyone is allowed to debate. And Schoolhouse Rock doesn't tell you that during that debate, the debate to debate, a single senator can slow down a bill at that point before anyone says a word about it. And a minority of senators, they can stop a bill cold.
Which is why these days it's pretty rare for legislation to get passed through Congress. It's why these days in Washington, D.C., you almost never hear this phrase.
He signed your bill, now you're a law. Oh, yeah!
You hear, take it away, Robert.
You just got filibustered, Bill. Now you're dead.
Oh, no. Hello and welcome to Planet Money. I'm Alex Bloomberg.
And I'm Robert Smith. Today, the reason why a lot of financial legislation.
All right. Welcome, everyone. And we will make sure to include that podcast in our follow-up email so you continue to listen. Just a short one, about 20 minutes long, I believe. So thank you, Jamel, for sharing with us. If you haven't done so, make sure you share where you're joining us from tonight via the chat feature. And then if you would also like to, in the spirit of belonging, you can rename yourself via the participant tab. And then if you go to your name, click on more, and you should be able to rename yourself so you can include your preferred pronouns if you so choose. Welcome to Building Bridges for America Virtual Book Club tonight on our first Monday of May 2021. And my name is Wes, and I am one of the co-hosts and have been co-hosting book clubs for Bridges over a year now. And so we are very excited that you are all with us. And if you are new, Building Bridges for America, we are a relational grassroots organization that is about equipping those grassroots organizers so they can support campaigns and causes based in progressive values. And values are what drives us, because if it wasn't for it, values define who you are and what you're all about. And so you can see our values listed here. We are an organization that was inspired by Pete Buttigieg's 2020 campaign's Rules of the Road. So you may hear people talk about Pete, but please know that all progressive, values-minded folks are welcome here. And we are committed to the development of a broad and inclusive coalition because we know that the effort adds value regardless of the result. And so you just being here tonight, that is an effort, and that adds value to what you are doing in your local community. So thank you for being here, because we are all about seeing a just and equitable democracy, safeguarded by an informed and engaged electorate where everyone is valued and belongs. So we hope you experience that belonging with us tonight. And to help Building Bridges guide everything that we do, including book club, we have 4 lenses: racial equity, democratic reform, belonging, and ensuring our rural and urban communities are bridged. And so we'll be talking more about those later tonight as it connects to our reading through Adam Gentlesen's Kill Switch. So again, welcome. And just a few norms to make sure we have a evening where everyone feels like they do belong. Your mics are currently muted, so please keep those muted. And if you would like to contribute to our discussion this evening, make sure you use the raise hand or chat feature responsibly. That way we can just hear from a multitude of voices. We are recording tonight's event, and so if you would like to, feel free to turn your camera off, and you can also rename yourself to protect your individual privacy. And then lastly, let's all make sure we adhere to the values of respect, belonging, and joy. If you're new to Zoom or need a refresher, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a reactions button. If you click on that, if you're on a computer or tablet, then a little menu should pop up that shows you that raise hand feature. If you're on a phone, we got a way to help you out. The ellipsis button or more button, it's in the bottom right hand of your phone screen. Tap on that, and then you should see that raise hand option as well. So again, please make sure you use that chat and raise hand feature responsibly so we can hear from a variety of folks tonight. So I believe that is all I need to share. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And now I'm excited because I get to see all your voices, or all your voices. I get to see all your faces. My Lord. I have to tell you, I had a medical emergency. All is well. It was a kidney stone. It's gone. Hallelujah. But I've been out of the teaching mode and interacting mode all last week. Literally, it happened the night of our last week book club. So it's been a long last 5 days. So I'm excited, though, to be with you all here. Tonight, we are so excited that we are going to be starting our conversation with Chara Torres-Spelliscy. And Chara, if I mispronounce your last name, please correct me. But Chara comes from us. She is a professor teaching courses at Stetson University College of Law, located in Florida. Courses on the election law, corporate governance, business entities, and constitutional law. And prior to joining Stetson's faculty, Chara was a part of the Brennan Center for Justice at the New York University School of Law. And if you don't know about the work Brennan Center is doing, they do phenomenal work on many different issues. So highly encourage you to check them out. Chara also continues to serve with the Brennan Center as a fellow. And another interesting note that I learned while reading her biography is that Chara served with Senator Richard Durbin as well as part of her professional experience. Professor Torres-Spelliscy has testified before Congress, state and local legislative bodies, especially on the issue of campaign finance reform, draft legislation, and Supreme Court briefs. She's also an author of 2 books, Corporate Citizen, An Argument for the Separation of Corporation and State, and the book Political Brands. And she is highly, has done tons of research on many different issues that speak to democratic reform in particular, and has done a lot of conference speaking and whatnot. And so we are just honored, Chara, that you are choosing to share your perspectives and experiences with us this evening. And so please expand on that introduction and just give us a little more about who you are and what you expect to share with us tonight.
So I teach constitutional law and election law here at Stetson to very conservative students, which I hope keeps me honest. And it has been a very interesting year to teach. I've taught all remotely, and I did a business entities class, the First Amendment, election law, and constitutional law. So all of those topics have been in the news recently. And when I teach constitutional law, one of the things that I take the time to do is I play Schoolhouse Rock for my students, in part because after all of these years, it is still wildly accurate in terms of how the Senate and House and President are supposed to work together to create legislation. Bicameralism and presentment is the way that we constitutionally make laws in the United States. But of course, the filibuster has become a huge hindrance in passing all sorts of legislation, including things that I really care about, like campaign finance reform. So the last time I really ran into the filibuster professionally was in 2010. So that was the year that the Supreme Court decided Citizens United versus FEC, which is the case that empowers corporations to spend as much money as they want to in any American election. And so what I was working at the Brennan Center at the time, and I was working on a piece of legislation called the Disclose Act, which would have brought more transparency to money in politics, because it was pretty clear that if the Congress didn't create new transparency rules for money in politics, that we would have what happened next. So what happened next is between 2010 and 2020, there was $1 billion of dark money spent in our elections. And then just in the year 2020, there was an additional $1 billion spent darkly. And I can explain what I mean by dark money in a moment. But back in 2010, the Disclose Act was up, and it was one of these pieces of legislation that would have brought more transparency to money in politics, but it couldn't get through the filibuster. And it was one of those heartbreaking filibuster votes because it got 59 votes. And so it failed by a single vote. And one of the people who I thought we could have counted on was John McCain, but he was unwilling to be that 60th vote to break the filibuster on the Disclose Act. And as a consequence, we didn't have the Disclose Act. And that's what led to there being $2 billion of dark money over the past 21 years. Sorry, 11 years. Let me do some math. Anywho, and what I mean by dark money is money that's spent in our politics that can't be traced to its original source. So that was probably enough.
Well, you're so right when you said that in your work with the issues like campaign finance reform and other reform initiatives we are trying to have passed to make progress to protect our democracy, it is being essentially killed instantly because of the filibuster. And you mentioned that you're teaching a student body that for the most part identifies as conservative. And so I guess my first question for you is, what are your students saying in terms of the filibuster overall? What are you hearing from them?
Actually, remarkably little. So, I mean, these are busy law students. So if you ask them a direct question or you put it on the syllabus, then you can talk to them about the filibuster. And for a very long time, I used to assign a article, I think it was from the New Yorker, called "The Graveyard for Good Ideas," which was about the filibuster and the US Senate, and how the House is built for speed. It passes lots and lots of legislation, and then a lot of legislation, left, right, and center, when it gets to the Senate, dies an untimely death because you need a supermajority to invoke cloture, as in to end debate, so that you can actually vote on the underlying legislation. So I don't think they are particularly passionate about the filibuster unless they had a previous career in the Florida legislature, or a few of them have worked for Congress. But in general, I think it seems esoteric and alien. And so, and I guess the other thing that I see a lot of is just not much civics education and not much American history. So in some ways, I feel like I am always doing remedial American history and remedial civics while teaching constitutional law, because to understand what's going on in the cases that we read, you have to have some appreciation for what happened in American history around the time that the case that we're studying occurred.
Well, and I did not share this as we met prior to letting everyone in, but I am a U.S. social studies teacher, teaching history and government. So that is painful to hear that, and I've heard it before, but it just, it saddens me when students are not prepared in that regard. But I will say it's also hard, and please support Chara and myself and anyone else who is a teacher, because this week is Teacher Appreciation Week. So we always appreciate knowing that we are supported. So, and I know you all do. So you kind of shared just slightly, student perspective, and we chatted a little bit in the room prior to as well. But and you mentioned that professionally, with your work on campaign finance reform, the filibuster really was detrimental. You worked with Senator Durbin. Can you kind of speak on your experience working with Senator Durbin? How what was the filibuster like during that time that you worked with Senator Durbin?
So I worked in the Senate in the late 1990s, which is over 20 years ago. So I can do that math now. And when I was there, that was during Newt Gingrich's speakership in the House. And he was trying to pass all sorts of regressive pieces of legislation. And one of the reasons why I have very mixed feelings about the filibuster is the filibuster was one of the things that stopped a lot of those Gingrich bills from becoming law. And so it was the Democrats who were in the minority at that point. And they, on occasion, to stop some of the really, crazy wackadoodle things that were coming out of the House at that point, use the rules of the Senate, use the filibuster, use the high supermajority cloture rules to stop that legislation. And I think, from my perspective as a progressive, that was needed, because otherwise you could have had, sort of all sorts of restrictive laws on abortion. You could have laws that gutted the Clean Air Act. You could have laws that gutted OSHA. I mean, you could just go on and on and on, where the ability to stop legislation from the House was actually really important during that time. This was also, I left right before Clinton was impeached, but that, sort of zealousness over the president's sexual problems, which I was not a fan of, but I am not sure it merited a impeachment. But it was that same spirit of, vengefulness and vindictiveness that was coming out of the House at that time, made me very proud to be a Senate staffer, because I thought that the Senate Democrats at the time were basically trying to hold the line on a lot of regressive legislation, and it didn't become law because of this procedural tool.
And so now, like, fast forwarding, and you work a lot, with big corporations and their influence on our democracy. And we've been reading, Adam really starts his work giving us a history of the filibuster and what it really wasn't when we first started as a country, because it didn't exist. And then as it slowly evolved and racially was used to systematically impact Black Americans, and other minority communities as well. So with your work though in the corporate law and corporate influence on our democracy, do you feel that big corporations, especially right now in today's political atmosphere, do they benefit from the ability for a minority of us senators to block legislation? And what are some current things that you're aware of that corporations really are taking advantage of when just maybe a handful of senators support what they want and block any successful legislation?
So when you're talking about corporations, we always have to be careful because just like individuals, they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. So there's everything from like the mom and pop store on your corner that is a corporation, to a multinational corporation. And when you're talking about the multinationals and publicly traded corporations, those are the ones that concern me when they get involved in American politics, because many of the biggest ones have more money flowing through them than small countries. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. They literally like have more money running through them than certain European countries. And that gives them an enormous amount of power and clout. So, I mean, one of the really difficult things with looking at money in politics at the federal level is it's just sort of enormously complicated. So on the one hand, we still have a law on the books from 1907 called the Tillman Act. And that prevents corporations from giving money directly to federal candidates. So they can't give to candidates for the Senate, the House, or the presidency. On the other hand, for a very long time, starting in about the 1950s, the corporate lawyers figured out, actually copying union lawyers who were also banned from giving directly to federal candidates, that all they really needed to do was to set up corporate PACs. And the corporate PACs are funded by individuals who are associated with that corporation. So, if you look at the average corporate PAC, you can go to places like opensecrets.com or followthemoney.org. And if you look at those sources, you'll see a lot of vice presidents of a particular corporation giving to the corporate PAC. And they do that to further their career within the corporate structure. But all of that money in a corporate PAC is actually from individuals associated with that corporation. And then post Citizens United, we have the advent of the super PAC. So with super PACs, they have to spend independently of political parties and candidates. And when they spend independently, they are allowed to spend as much as they want. So they can gather in unlimited resources and spend in an unlimited way. And so one of the ways that you can see publicly traded corporations spending in US elections is to look at super PACs and who their donors are. And that is actually still transparent. And so one of the things you see a lot of is fossil fuels, those companies spending under their doing business as name. So you can find, $1 million donations from Chevron to Mitch McConnell's super PAC. And I think that has an impact on what the Senate, especially what Senate Republicans, because almost all of the corporate money goes towards Republicans. And I think that changes how those senators are responsive to those huge donors. Now, one of the things that will be, I think, interesting going forward, and it'll all depend, but one phenomenon you see is that money often follows power. So if Democrats continue to win elections, then I would expect some of that corporate spending to shift to the incumbents. And if the incumbents are Democrats, it would shift to them. But on the other hand, who benefits from the filibuster? Whenever something is ingrained in law that is good for corporations, then deadlock becomes good for corporations. So in 2017, that was the Trump tax cut. And one of the taxes that was cut in that law was the corporate tax rate. So right now, corporations have an incentive for the filibuster to be used against any attempts to raise that tax rate back up to what it had been, 3 or 4 years ago. And so in cases like that, the deadlock is in favor of this lower corporate tax rate that they won in 2017. But it all depends on what it is and what corporation you're talking about. So there was a lot of rollback of different regulations during the Trump administration. Now that can usually be done through the regulatory state and not necessarily through the Senate. But there's often a winner who wants deadlock to persist because they like the way the status quo is for them.
I was just about to write what you just said there at the end, because I think you nailed it. Keeping the status quo and benefits, with the filibuster, that allows deadlock to continue. And then that just allows the status quo to stay intact. And those who benefit it, for example, corporations with the corporate tax cut, then they will continue to be benefited from it. It's just an interesting, because as I'm processing what you're saying, and people love the filibuster because minority rights, right? It's protecting the rights of and views of the minority. When I say corporate, I just think the top 1%, the very rich, and they're benefiting from this, and it's just, it's so frustrating. But people love when things are deadlocked, because then they can continue to go about their lives. Doesn't matter. I believe Benedict has his hand raised, so we're going to get him unmuted so he can ask his question to you.
Hi, Wes. Thanks so much for hosting this.
Oh,
Did we lose him?
Yep. He just wanted to give us thanks, I guess.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
There we go. And thank you so much, Professor Torres. It's really been amazing hearing this conversation already. But I did have a question about the idea of corporate power in politics, and obviously as it connects to direct contributions or contributions through corporate PACs to candidates, there's clearly a problem there. But I think something that's been really interesting lately is what you've seen in Georgia, for example, and other states where a controversial or unpopular with a certain group of people policy is passed, like the new voting law in Georgia, and then you have pressure on corporations like Coca-Cola and others to basically talk to the politicians that they've been giving money to and kind of pressuring them. So you have kind of the consumer pressure through the corporate pressure through the elected officials, because they still do get money from the corporate PACs. I'm just kind of wondering how you if you think that's a trend that's going to continue in that direction, if that could, at least while Citizens United is a thing, help to balance out some of the negative realities of corporate donations. I was just wondering kind of what your thoughts are on that kind of new phenomena.
Yeah, and you raise an excellent point, which I omitted. So thank you for the question. Each of the 50 states has their own election laws, which is different and distinct from federal election laws. So what I told you before, that's what happens at the federal level. But then we have all of the 50 states. So in half of the states, roughly, corporations can give directly to candidates for office, whether that's the governorship or your state and local lawmakers. Corporations can write a check that, you know, literally comes from the corporate treasury directly to, you know, a candidate for governor, including sitting governors. And so one of the things you saw in Georgia was voting rights activists know this. And so they looked at open secrets and follow the money. And they decided, oh, wow, you know, certain big corporations, including Coke and Delta and Home Depot and a lot of others, have given money directly to the sitting governor, Brian Kemp, and some of the main sponsors of this regressive voting law that Georgia just enacted. And so these voting rights activists, I think, are getting more sophisticated and thoughtful about it. And they decided, well, if the governor and the state legislature is not listening to its citizenry, let's talk to their donors. And so they mounted a lot of pressure on Coke and Delta and Home Depot and elsewhere. And there was, at first, it was sort of a mixed response from these corporations. And so these corporations are, some of them, they're located in Georgia. Like Home Depot is the largest employer in the state of Georgia. But they weren't just being targeted because they're located in Georgia. They were being targeted because they're political donors to the Republicans who created this regressive law in Georgia and around voting rights. And so at first it was a little squishy, but eventually a lot of different corporations signed their names, about 100 of them, to a huge newspaper ad that basically said, we as corporations do not support these regressive voting laws. And I think they are being responsive to at least two constituencies. One, as you mentioned, they're consumers. But one of the things that I've worked a lot about and I wrote about in Political Brands is they can also piss off their investors. So I think we might have a stereotype of like what an investor is, but if any of you have a 401k, I would bet that some of your 401k is actually, which is like your retirement fund, is actually invested in the stock market, often through an index fund, which means that you own like hundreds, like small parts of hundreds of companies. And one of the things that happened post Citizens United is investors, especially progressive investors, started using their rights that they have under the federal securities laws. And so they have been pressuring corporations to be better, like to be better on human rights, to be better on the environment, to be better on disclosure of corporate political spending, which they can hide through dark money conduits. And, you know, the whole world hasn't changed, but hundreds of more corporations are being more responsible on many different fronts because their own investors have been yelling at them for the past decade.
I just put that in the chat, but never heard of or ever thought of progressive investing pressure. And using, I mean,
Well,
I know people boycott stores and stuff, but yeah, investing, duh.
Well, one of the biggest investors in the world is CalPERS, which is the California, I think, teachers. I should know this off the top of my head, but you know, basically the pension funds of individuals who work for the state of California, either as teachers or other public servants. They have a lot of money to invest because they've had a lot of teachers retire and they have to plan for that. And the way that they plan for that is they are heavily invested in the stock market. And that means that they have some clout. So CalPERS in California, NYSTERS in New York, they have, you know, it's like waking a sleeping giant, but post Citizens United, there is such a thing as progressive investors, and they have rights under the federal securities laws to do what is known as a shareholder resolution. So you basically put a request to the company on the proxy, which is what investors vote on an annual basis. So in the same place that you elect the board of directors and you appoint your auditors and do whatever management is up to, then there are the shareholder proposals. And so shareholder proposals have been put in to have more transparency around human rights in your supply chain, environmental impacts, environmental risks, and transparency of corporate political spending. So there's a lot of tumult going on around shareholder season because when there's these failures, like the failure in the Senate because of the filibuster, which makes it very difficult to get our government to actually do things, people have been turning to different avenues of protests. And so whether it's consumers saying, I will boycott you if you continue to support these people who are creating these bad voting laws, that's one line of pressure. But another line of pressure is what investors have been doing over the past couple of years.
That's awesome, and good to know that there's that pressure happening. And because one of our questions, what are some things that we as citizens can do, to put more pressure to see the changes and reform that we want to see? And you definitely nailed that question right there. So well done. That was very insightful. So thank you, Benedict, for asking that question as well. Jackie, I know you have your hand raised, and we're going to get to you. But before we get to you, we're going to first jump to Kathleen, who put a question in the chat. So Kathleen, we'll get you unmuted, and you can go ahead and share your question with Shara.
Excuse me, I actually had a two-part question. One is, how are we going to unstructure the minority controlling the Senate when they're in control, the southern states? Can you hear me?
It's going in and out a little bit. So
I'm gonna cut my video, so hopefully you'll hear me better.
Okay.
One is unstructuring the Senate so that the minority of the South is not in control of everything, pretty much. And the other part, yeah.
Kathleen, it's really hard to hear you. If you want, I can kind of just share it, and if you want to expand,
Yeah.
you can
And
put it in the
the
chat.
other part, Biden's doing a lot of good work. My concern is when the White House changes parties again, the same thing will happen Trump did, and start going after lands and everything else and taking out all the good and giving it all to the powerful rich.
Okay, I think I heard the questions.
Okay.
How do we control or restructure the Senate so that the minority doesn't have control, especially with the South controlling some of who is in the minority? And then what happens if...
Sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so let me tackle that first one. So I mean, I think one of the things that Adam Genelson grapples with in his book is that the Senate was not inherently supposed to be a supermajority rule. If you go back to the original conception of what the Senate was going to be, that this has evolved over time. And I think the one of the frustrating things is that the Senate itself, when it organizes at the beginning of every 2-year cycle, they can decide not to have this 60 vote cloture rule, and it has not decided to get rid of it for legislation. They have gotten rid of it first for presidential appointments that happened under President Obama, in part because Mitch McConnell was being so obstructionist and not letting the presidential appointments go through both lower courts and just in the executive branch. He was being just ridiculous. And I think that's when Harry Reid decided we have to go nuclear, which is basically getting back to majority rule on those presidential appointments. And then under Trump, you get Mitch McConnell, now re in power, changing the filibuster rule for Supreme Court nominees, which is how Gorsuch gets on the Supreme Court. And so now we have this ongoing and lively debate about whether the Senate should change the filibuster rules for normal legislation. And it would only take 51 votes for them to do that. Right now, it looks like sort of some combination of Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema, and John Tester seem unwilling to vote to reform the filibuster, at least right now. I mean, because it's a 50-50 Senate, they could bring in the vice president, they would have 51 votes, but if you lose any of the Democratic senators, then you don't have 51 anymore. And so I'm not particularly optimistic that in the Senate, I mean, we'll see, because I think things that a lot of Americans want, like the passage of HR 1, which is an omnibus reform of our democratic processes, that's going to get hung up in the filibuster. And so we'll see whether there is enough pressure that could be put on the senators who want to keep the filibuster to change it. We shall see. And I think the other question was, what will happen when we have a Republican president if we've gotten rid of the filibuster? And that could be extraordinarily scary in terms of what federal laws could be enacted if you have what you had at the beginning of the Trump administration, which was a Republican president and a Republican House and a Republican Senate. And sort of weirdly, I think because Trump didn't seem very interested in governing, he didn't get very much done. He got that tax cut and that was about it. I mean, they sort of tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, but failed. And in this time, Senator McCain actually came through. He was the pivotal vote that saved the Affordable Care Act. But with a 50-50 Senate, I'm not sure that this will be the moment that reforming the filibuster will actually happen. Who knows?
Thank you, Kathleen, for your question. And we're gonna jump to Jackie, and then I got one last question for you, Tara, and that will conclude our Q&A. So Jackie, we'll get you unmuted.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about, did I hear you say that individuals in a corporation can donate to a political candidate to, rise in the corporation itself? I wondered if I actually heard you say that. And I have another question about the Federalist Society in law schools, supporting their clubs and groups and providing big, tasty buffets while the poor Democrats are struggling like hell to, pay dues in order to have meetings. I just have no optimism at all for midterms or for the presidential election. I'm in Arizona. I see the viciousness that's going on. And after reading the book, I see that there's a historical precedence for all of this sabotage. So I'm the question about the law schools being invaded by the Republican Party and cultivating these conservative lawyers has resulted in places like the ACLU not having enough progressive lawyers. So I wanted you to comment on that because I've read quite a bit about that and it's disturbing.
Well, I did say that I think the reason why you see so many vice presidents giving to their corporate PAC is that is one way to show your loyalty to the corporation and the hope that you may no longer be a vice president someday. You will be a CEO or a CFO or some other high executive within that corporate structure. Now, it is true that the corporations cannot force their vice presidents and other employees to give to a corporate PAC. They also can't give sort of fake bonuses that they know will go into politics. This is the way that George Steinbrenner racked up a felony. So during Watergate, one of the things that came out was that George Steinbrenner at his company gave fake bonuses to his executives with full knowledge that they were going to give that to the Nixon re-election campaign, which is perfectly illegal. And hence why he ended up with a felony. Later, he gets pardoned for that, not by Nixon, I think by Reagan. But anyway, so there's this whole story of corporations, trying to get more influence with various politicians, including Nixon. Though when Watergate happened, the Tillman Act was already a law. So that same law that's still in place today that says that corporations can't give money from their corporate treasury to federal candidates, that was another one of the laws that got broken during the Watergate scandal, because the Nixon re-election campaign kept on asking corporate CEOs for corporate money, and a lot of them gave corporate money even though it was illegal. So that's one other piece of history out there. And then your question about the Federalist Society. So I would put this in the category of deep and long-term lobbying. So I think the idea behind the Federalist Society was to create a career path for conservative lawyers and to make it the feeder for the federal judiciary. And you definitely saw that during the Trump administration. The Trump administration essentially outsourced judicial selection to the Federalist Society, and the Federalist Society was all too happy to oblige. I remember I wrote a piece about this for the Brennan Center, which I think is called "Bet Them Now or Bet Them Later." And essentially, my objection to this. Like I think we can have intellectual diversity on the federal bench, but one of the troubling thing with some of these Trump appointees is they were not getting a well-qualified rating from the ABA. So you're putting really young conservatives on the bench who aren't getting a well-qualified rating from, their peer group. And, maybe some of them will grow into the role. I surely hope so, because we have lifetime tenure for our federal judges. So it really matters who is on the court, because they're going to be on there for a long time. I mean, in very rare circumstances, if they actually get into criminal territory, then they can be removed through impeachment. But as we've seen, not all impeachments actually go all the way through. So they're, for all intents and purposes, they are there for the rest of their natural lives. But Biden has an opportunity to appoint good, competent, thoughtful people to the bench. And I've been encouraged that he's doing it so early. I think they learned their lesson. The Obama nominees, well, number one, they got filibustered, but that rule has changed. So it'll be easier for Biden to get his appointees to the bench than it was for Obama to get his appointees. And so there is a chance to put competent, thoughtful lawyers on the bench with this president, and especially with this Senate, so long as they have the majority.
Thank you, Jackie, for your question. And you are correct, Chara, on the title, Vet Them Now or Vet Them Later. I typed it in Google and boom, it popped up. So I put that link there in the chat for everyone. And if you are not fully aware of what President Biden is doing with judicial appointments, I know the Brennan Center actually put out an article recently applauding the diversity in his judicial picks so far early in his tenure. So I know he's been applauded for that work. My last question for you here, as we're wrapping up our Q&A time, is, and I think Jenny, you put it in the chat, so I'm stealing your question because I thought it was really good. My first question is simple. Do you feel that reforming the Senate rule, particularly with the filibuster, should be a top priority for our current Senate with the Democrats?
This is a tough one for me as a former Senate staffer, because on the one hand, the Senate is the graveyard for good ideas, but it's also the brakes on what could otherwise be a runaway train. And the structure of the Senate, that only a third of them are up every 2 years instead of having the whole House up for election, which is what can cause the huge swings in the House. So there's only so much change you can get in the Senate. It is a real conundrum, because on the one hand, I think if we want to reform our democracy now through legislation like HR 1, the only chance to do that may be to get rid of the filibuster for legislation. But that also comes with enormous risk, that the American voter is fickle, and if the next wave is a right-wing backlash, that you will have whatever the younger, more competent version of Trump, his acolytes in the House and the Senate, and that could create all sorts of horrible federal laws. And from a constitutional law perspective, it's a bad thing to have horrible federal laws, because under our Constitution, if there's a conflict between a federal law and a state law, it's the federal law that controls. So having bad federal law can undo good laws in all 50 states. But the converse is true too, which is why I pushed for HR1. One of the things we're seeing now, post 2020, is lots of Republican controlled states are passing regressive voting laws. They're making it harder to register to vote. They're making it harder to vote. They're making it illegal to give people water standing in a hot line in a state like mine in Florida. And passing something like HR1 would put a baseline on the rights of voters in all 50 states. And that would be an amazing and good thing. But it doesn't come without risks. And so I'm going to be non-committal on whether we should actually get rid of the filibuster. I would love for it to go away for a day so that they could pass HR1. And then I sort of want it back as a protection against the extremes to which American politics can go.
And, that debate on it is something I know many individuals expressed last week when we first started talking about kill switch and whatnot. And so we have some people who are absolutely, we need to get rid of it right now. Can't worry about what could happen, where others are a little more skeptical and whatnot. And maybe there's other things we could do to tweak that. So we're learning and we're excited to dive even deeper into Adam's book. We've just scratched the surface really with just the history. So feel free, if you have time, join us in the weeks ahead if you would like. But my last question, because I know you are passionate about democratic reform to save our democracy on various issues. So what would be, real quick, if you could just list them out, the 3 top reforms that you would like to see happen in the next 2 to 4 years to protect our democracy?
So over at the Securities and Exchange Commission, I would hope that they would take this opportunity to promulgate a rule that would end dark money from publicly traded corporations. Then over in the legislature, HR1 has so many good features to it, dealing with extreme partisan gerrymandering, which the Supreme Court has washed its hands of with the Raucho case, dealing with digital dark money, which we didn't even get to, but one of the ways you can hide money in politics is by making all of your ads on Facebook and Twitter, and then our regulation basically doesn't reach it. So dealing with that. And then finally, public financing for congressional candidates. I think it would really change the game in terms of who could afford to run for office. And we need good people to run for office. We can't just have a institution, whether it's the House or the Senate, which is predominated by millionaires.
And white, rich, old men, millionaires. So
I have less problem with that than the overrepresentation of the extraordinarily wealthy. The extraordinarily wealthy can come in many shapes and sizes.
True. Yes, I just love a little more diversity though, because I think with that diversity will come even better ideas, and hopefully we can invoke cloture someday, and then maybe not have to get rid of that dang filibuster. Who knows? But Chara, we really appreciate your insight and just the many perspectives that you brought tonight. As an individual who's worked with the Brennan Center, as a professor passionate about constitutional law and campaign refinance, and your experience working with Senator Durbin. We just truly appreciate you choosing to spend your Monday evening with us so that we can continue to learn. I wrote a lot of things down because I don't know too much about campaign finance, whatnot, but I want to read more. We will be sure to include your book titles so folks can continue to purchase those and learn more about your work. And I know I follow you on Twitter, and I'm just excited to see what you share in that social media space as this journey with the new administration continues. And hopefully we do see those 3 items that you listed off come to fruition sometime soon. So again, on behalf of everyone, thank you so much. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
And you're more than welcome to stick around if you want. Otherwise, feel free to go about the rest of your evening, okay?
Right. Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks so much. And thank you to everyone for your questions. I learned so much, and I have a lot more to learn. And I'm excited to continue learning as we dialogue about chapter 3 and 4, finishing part 1 that gives us that history of the filibuster. I know there were some good questions and comments there at that last part of the Q&A. I'm really excited because I want to keep learning more about what Adam says, because I know folks like Jackie and I can't remember the other person's name, who they've already read this whole book. So you guys are further ahead. Kathleen has read the full book. And so you guys know what's coming up, and I know it's going to get really good. So Jamel, I believe, is ready to put us in breakout rooms. Is that correct, Jamel?
Yes. So we are all set to have people go into breakout rooms. We lost a few people, so you know, the rooms are pretty even, but I'm going to do that now. And just remember, you're going to be asked to join a breakout room. Click on that, and Wes, don't forget to reassign me. So I'm hitting.
I put the link for the questions. If you see something further along or another question that you want to pull in, and Wes too, if you notice something ahead, I've just skimmed these that might be a good one for us to get into, you just let me know and we can jump to it, because we will likely not get to all of these, would be my guess.
Were those questions available prior to the meeting tonight? Were they
Yes.
posted somewhere?
They're usually in the emails that come prior to the they're called the reading guide, but they're the same questions that are on here.
All right, thank you.
So we'll just go. There's only 6 of us in here. That's it. Oh, okay. All right, so let's just start with chapter 3, and if there's anything that you guys that comes to mind that you want to chime in with, absolutely go ahead. All right, first question. Which do you think has a bigger impact on how legislation is moved in the Senate? The Senate rules themselves or the senators' personalities? That's a great question.
The rules, definitely the rules.
Rules, you think the rules?
I think so, yeah. Because I can't think of much that's been moved in the last 20 years. I mean,
that's a good point.
It makes me want to go back and look at like the few things that were voted in and figure out how many votes they had and who was supporting them and who wasn't, because I didn't realize, I knew that the filibuster was a problem, but I didn't realize how much of a problem it was at holding back all legislation until I started reading this book.
Right.
And
yeah.
So.
And that's a really good point. I think my first reaction was, I'm always like thinking personalities, but you're right. If nothing has gotten done, then it's the rules that seem to be holding back. I don't know. What does everybody else think? What do you think? Lynn, do you have any opinion on that?
Rules
holding... Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was thinking about the with Trump and the impeachment. Wasn't there some interjection of the rules that stopped some of the procedure, or I don't know the specifics of it, but I remember it popped up somewhere and there was like a wait until the rules person stood up. Anybody else remember that? Or am I just, it wasn't really about passing legislation. It was more about procedure, I think.
There
No,
was
that,
a parliamentarian you might be thinking about, but I don't remember what.
I'm sorry, that's who I, yeah, that's
Yeah,
what
I
I was
don't
thinking
remember
of.
what that specifically was about.
that was whether the
Okay.
Jobs Act would go through as a budget bill as opposed to having to go through regular Senate procedure where it needed a
Oh, yeah.
supermajority. As if
Yeah.
it was a reconciliation bill, then it could go through on a majority vote.
Okay, that's probably.
I
Oh,
would agree
yes.
with you all that
Go ahead, Wes.
I think it's the rules. I mean,
Yeah.
historically the rules, and yes, personality plays a role, because when you
Sure.
get a racist in there, it's really hard to change a racist personality, but the rules are what gives them the power and the
Right.
ability to be effective.
Well, it certainly seems like it during this, since the millennial, whatever, since 2000, it just seems like everything is so strictly by party, and that obviously isn't being run by,
Yeah.
there are personalities behind there, but that's not what's moving those people. It's some kind of party line thing. So, I mean, I don't know how it was. I know that we went through a process of probably moving away from what was going on in the 50s when there were people voting on both sides. That was very interesting about the chapters that we read, is
Right.
trying to figure out, well, like, why was this Democrat voting in with this Republican? It's like, because it's so freaky now that we don't do any of that. So I'm trying to like rearrange things in my head as I'm reading it, and then I'm going, they weren't like us then. They were there was a group of them from the southern states that were like that wanted to be that way, but not everybody was that way yet. So I'd like to see more about the progression, like how this was just eaten away at until we get to this point where, nothing can move. I mean, nothing can move, it seems like.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very,
We
very
need to give them
frustrating.
a
Yeah.
We need them a laxative for the Senate.
Exactly. Yeah. And Wes, what you put in there was it blew my mind too. Nixon being for civil rights. It's like, oh, you wouldn't, that's not the first thing that would come to your mind for sure.
That's true.
But there it was. Yeah. It's very fascinating following, the timeline of all of this as it's going along. Okay. So question number 2, is there anything that surprised you about the way that Southern Democrats banded together to use filibuster power to block or weaken civil rights legislation in the 40s? Anything that surprised you? You know what? I'll put the question in the chat too, if you want to. Whoops. Makes it easier to be able to see it.
This is Wendy. Nothing in the Senate surprises me, and I actually used to work there 2009 to 2017 for Senator Harry Reid. So it was the bulk of that portion of, or that time, was when he was the majority leader, and then he was the minority leader the Democratic leader the last 2 years. And there are a lot of things that can get passed, and a lot of it can depend on the chairmen and women of the various committees. So if you have some pretty powerful chairs and ranking members, who are Democrats and Republicans, who can work together and can package legislation together, which unfortunately that's another reality that we're dealing with, is that you package Democratic and Republican priorities together, and because everybody wants to get something done rather than nothing getting done, then you agree to their priorities, and then you can get your priorities done as well. And so you see this a lot in some of the public lands legislation, where you have these massive packages that go through for national parks and public lands and different lands bills that are very specific for certain states, and they want to get those things done for their states. And so they agree, to put everything together so everybody's legislation can get done. And so that kind of, it's coalition building, really. You're building support so nobody votes against, what you're trying to do. I can see we're in the 40s, and I'm going to admit, I'm ordering the book right now from Politics and Prose.
Yeah.
I finally just remembered to sit down and order it. I worked with Adam, so he was my coworker. He was one of my buds, and so I haven't read any of the book yet. But hopefully by next week. I love all the discussion, though. I love the book club and talking about all of this and just kind of seeing where people are. Because, I tend to think that not a lot of people care or understand or want to know about, these not mundane, but arcane rules of the Senate and things like that. But really, there is so much sort of attention being paid to this, by people like, sort of the celebrity senators like Senator Elizabeth Warren, some of the ones who ran for president, Bernie, and so forth, kind of just speaking out about it. And then, of course, like Adam's book. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that in the 40s they banded together, because that happens. That's how they operate, and you have these historical, usually it's like around the military too, where you'll get everybody to agree about how legislation, should look, and they pass it and approve it, and funding levels and so on and so forth. So there are certain areas that they can gravitate around to get agreement. But when you do start talking about people of color and voting rights and those kinds of, you're not going to get that common ground.
No, that's true. Also, I need to bring up that someone from our group we're going to nominate somebody to just share with the big group. Are we doing that again? We're doing that, Wes, at the end, if we have time. Just a few points maybe of something we talked about. You don't have to get an entire summary, maybe just one interesting thing that popped out to you. When we go back to everybody, we just share like a little bit. So you don't, like I said, you don't have to make an outline and do everything that we talked about. Some people kind of try to do that, but that's not necessary. Maybe just one interesting thing that you remember, from our discussion. But you know what, Wendy, you're talking about people thinking that things, this topic is so, mundane. A lot of people don't know anything about it. Well, I mean, I'm kind of one of those people. I have not been involved in politics for most of my life until recent years. And a lot of my friends are exactly the same, but the reason I keep coming back and to book club and, some of this stuff, I feel like it's so over my head, but I learned so much. And it is, you hear about filibuster all the time, especially recently. And, I want to know, like, what's this all about? So this book has been such an eye opener, just following, the history and how that kind of thing fascinates me. And, just me learning about it might get easier for me to explain it, to other people too. So I think it's important. It's supposed to be for us, for everybody, not just those in politics, but anyway, okay. Did anyone else have any thoughts on that or go on to the next one? Okay, so let's see. I'm looking at some of these and see if we could Well, I'm going to do, oh, this is good. Okay, I like number 5, actually. This one, I will put it in the chat. Hubert Humphrey, the mayor of Minneapolis at the time, his quote that said, "The time has arrived in America for the Democratic Party to get out of the shadow of states' rights and to walk forthrightly into the bright sunshine of human rights." What do you think Humphrey would say today? And what would you say for him? What would you say for him?
I came up with that question, and so what would you say the Democratic Party needs to do today? What shadow do we need to walk out of?
What do you think, what he would say today, and what do we need to, okay, got it.
I think he would think that we're on the precipice of achieving some pretty good things with human rights. And I'm naive because, like you, I have not been that involved in the last 10 or 15 years for reasons, work and child raising and stuff like that. But
Sure.
now I have all this time and I'm trying to get a grip on it. But anyway, I do remember the Humphrey philosophy. I think he would be pleased if we can hang on to this direction.
I think he would say the same thing. And I am from Minnesota. I grew up in Minneapolis. So
Oh yeah, don't you know?
I'm very proud. I'm very proud of all of our politicians, like, you know, Walter Mondale and Hubert Humphrey,
Yeah.
and you know, Al Franken and
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Paul Wellstone. So they're all very great. You know, and we've got one of the first Muslim Americans in the Congress, you know, Ilhan Omar.
Yeah. A lot to be
got
proud
some
of.
diversity, and 2 women senators now. We've joined the ranks of the handful of states with 2 women senators. So that's pretty great. I think he would say the same thing. You know, there's always going to be somebody who's getting under attack. Right now, it's like these trans children, and them from, you know, competing in sports and so on and so forth, which I don't think that should be in a state law. I think those should be just policies, you know, that can be promulgated. But you know, it's I think something has to be a pretty big deal to put it in a code or in a law. That's not, you know, to be codified like that. But I think you would say the same thing, because somebody's always getting under attack. You know, their rights, and those are human rights, women's rights, children's rights, you know, LGBTQ, people of color. You know, right now we're dealing with the police, you know, and lethal force being used against, you know, Black people. So it's the evolution of our democracy and our country.
Yeah, and I yeah, definitely. And Lynn, I actually I liked your response too about saying that you think that he would be pleased with where we are and what we're doing. Is that what you meant? Yeah.
Yeah, and actually it's probably more about the awareness. I mean, I remember when Humphrey lost his election. I mean, that's how old I am, and I remember being very disappointed at the time. I was a young person, but I just thought that was horrible. And I just feel like the times of late, as tough as they have been, are just like bursting with awareness about different peoples and their rights. And I don't know, that probably sounds stupid, but it's like so many things seem to are getting exposure and getting attention and getting straightened out.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, you know, you need you need the exposure first. And one thing that, you know, the Trump presidency did do, I mean, these things have been around, a lot of stuff isn't new, but it definitely exposed a lot of, you know, hot areas that need attention, and stuff takes time, you know, but you need to see it there first. Okay, so I'm actually going to jump to Chapter 4, question 2. President Johnson said, Well, what the hell's the presidency for? In response to his advisors warning him against taking up civil rights shortly after, oh, thank you, Wes, shortly after Kennedy's assassination. Do you feel President Biden has taken this approach, particularly in regards to issues that are impeding our democracy and bridges? In regards to and our bridges lenses, which are racial equality, rural urban issues, democratic reform, and belonging? And then Wes put that question in the chat there. What do you guys think about that? What Biden has?
I was a little confused about President Johnson, and I have been outside of reading the books because I haven't ever read any biographies of him.
No.
He seemed to really be playing a game before he became president. One of the things about reading these 2 chapters was realizing how many of these guys were playing a game, figuring out what, like they were in a maze trying to figure out which direction to go to increase their chances to get to the top, to be the president. So it didn't seem, I mean, the way he supported the Southern strategy and stuff like that earlier, was that totally a game with him? Did he really in his mind support civil rights then, or did he have some kind of come to Jesus moment, or what was the deal? Because why did he actually change his approach in 1964? I don't quite understand that. So
I always kind of wondered about that.
Well, and in that respect, I don't see him the same as Joe Biden, because Joe Biden has always followed a certain kind of empathetic approach for people. He made some mistakes in previous years, like all people made mistakes, especially all white people made mistakes around some of those criminal justice things and stuff like that. But I feel like he was much more of a genuine about his feelings and his emotions and his empathy for other people. And maybe not, Johnson just seems so scheming to me. So I don't quite trust.
But he did seem to hold this. He didn't let go. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I never understood that conflict. What appears to be, I just always saw like a Texas redneck without a lot of understanding or patience or anything else, and that's probably a very bad term to use, but I don't know how exactly to say it. But he held on to civil rights, and he got it. And it got it done, And the other thing that didn't jive was he was giving Kennedy's brother such a bad time at the same time that he was doing this, But he did it. The civil rights, I think he did as good a job as could have been done then.
Yeah, I
agree, Mary.
Yeah, I'm in agreement too, Lynn and Mary. Don't know much history on Johnson, and so reading that totally changes my view, because in the history books, Johnson is put up as, he carried Kennedy's mantra on civil rights. But then I was even shocked with Kennedy too, really was not passionate about civil rights until Reverend King's assassination. And like it really jaded me on kind of, at least as a teacher, and how I was taught where those 2 men are put in terms of what they did to bring about equality and equity in our country. They definitely are not the all-stars that maybe they get points.
Well, it also makes say what? It also makes me realize. Go ahead, Lynn.
Sorry, go ahead. No, it's not that important. Go ahead. It's not really pertinent.
I was just going to say that reading this stuff and thinking about, Kennedy and Johnson and all of them, it really makes me understand even more clearly how the masses of people now out there voting, it's like they latch onto a candidate, Bernie, or Biden, or Hillary, and they're looking at these, in a way, they're looking at a very superficial level of these people, because they're not looking behind to see what's going on behind them and what they've worked for all their lives and how they might have schemed and how they might have changed too. So it's not looking at all of the stuff that has to be done in order to get something passed. And so I'd like to think that the scheming goes on for the right reasons, but I think it also goes on just for the personal gain reasons. And that's quite illuminating too. I mean, I knew that, but reading it in black and white is very illuminating because it now gives me like specific knowledge and specific examples of it happening. And it made me think, well, has everybody that's run for office been that way? Were there any people that were really
Probably not. I mean, if you
I
look
know.
back,
I think that about that all the time. It's like,
yeah, I mean, because the ones that are moral, do they just get pushed off to the side?
Right.
And only the strong ones and the schemers and the game players and the strategists get to move to the top? Because it does seem like you have to put things aside. And to that extent, I do look at what's happening with Biden and I see people saying, well, why isn't Biden doing this yet? Or why isn't he doing that yet? Because it is like a chess game, because you have to play out all these pieces in a certain order if you're trying to build up an actual accomplishment. And I don't think the masses of people just on the street quite understand that, because why would they? They haven't studied any of this.
Agree. Yeah, agree.
All right, everyone is popping back in. We ran a little longer on the Q&A, and so I know some folks have had to move on to go about the rest of their evening. So thank you to those who have stuck around with us. I appreciate that. We got to do a lightning round of our break room wrap up. So please, if you are the rep, 1 minute or less would be really appreciated, so that we can honor everyone's time. So Jamel, you were room 1. So I don't know if you got someone or not, but
yes, there was a debate, but I'm going to ask Marcia to do 2 things. Say one thing about our discussion, and then also to tell people what she did today.
And I did not catch the name. So
Marcia. There, I've just asked her to unmute, I think.
Thank you.
Okay, with regard to the, we focused on sort of the history and the racist nature of the filibuster, and also how it sort of, the different settings that, during the, that we also, during the 50s and stuff, some of the Republicans were actually more progressive on the civil rights movement, as opposed to, because the southern states were all Democratic, and how that's changed in after 68. So that was, and then with regard to what's the solution, we were also sort of that obviously we would all like to get rid of it, but at the same time there is that sort of downside of danger of uncontrolled. So it's there is some tension there. With regard to what I did, I work for the Department of Justice. So today we were working on a case which is I call sort of the cleanup from Trump. It was a case that was originally challenging one of Trump's executive orders, the one that forbid diversity in, for federal government or for federal contractors teaching it. And that was one of the first executive orders that Biden signed. So I filed a brief today, because now I'm on the good, I've been assigned the case, so we were on the good side of trying to file a brief to moot it out.
And it's National Public Service Recognition Week. So Marcia, thank you for your public service.
Thank you, Marcia. And that is so good to hear, because I work with my school district's diversity, equity, and inclusion department, and the person who helps us facilitate and works with us has been impacted by that Trump EO. And so we are very thankful for what Biden has done to reverse that, and what you are going to do to continue to tackle that garbage work that the last guy did. So thank you, Marcia. And room 2, Jana, the rep from room 2.
In our room, we have Mary is just going to give us a real quick little point from our discussion. I got you in mute. Mary, I got to unmute you. Did you see the
There you
Sorry
go.
about that. I
No.
actually have 2 points. The
Awesome.
first point is we spent a bunch of time talking about how do people in Congress build coalitions to the extent that they are building coalitions these days. And we talked, and Wendy talked on that, and we talked a lot about things like military bills that they still agree on, and land packages where they can clearly have something for different parties to get buy-in. And then the other thing that I think we talked a lot about was the scheming and strategy that's required to get anything passed, and the scheming and strategy of these different people who are trying to build their personal careers at the same time that they're in Congress or in the presidency, and having a hard time figuring out the morality of the people versus what was strategy and self-serving qualities to get themselves elevated, especially Lyndon Johnson, like finding out about the kinds of things that he was into before he got the civil rights law passed. And it just makes me want to go out and read a book about him and find out what exactly was going through his mind that made him change his opinion.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much what we talked about.
That's awesome. Thank you, Mary.
Appreciate it. And from room three, Jenny.
Hey, we got Jackie's going to give us our summary in our room. We had such a busy time chatting, so we have a lot we went over. So
1 minute or less.
let me unmute you.
Well, okay. I don't know how good I'm going to be at this, because I think the theme of the night was everyone starting every sentence with "I was shocked." We were baffled that the southern states could be so against the well-being of the entire country. We discussed the history of that, and how even someone like Lyndon Johnson was against civil rights. And then, of course, he turned out to be a great president for civil rights. We talked about, interestingly, manipulation of candidates like Joni Ernst. We were all shocked about something tonight. I think I'm a little fuzzy on what we discussed, because it was, the whole night was so powerful for me anyway. We did talk about messaging, and I was very impressed with messaging, because we had some things that we wanted to deal with, like HR1 and so forth, all those things that are very, very important. And then my brain started going like everyone else, well, how are we going to accomplish that? But I really need I need you to fill in what I've missed, because it's a lot, I'm sure. Absolutely.
Well, I will respond real quick to your messaging thing. That is something that we are passionate about here at Building Bridges, because messaging is something that we as progressives, we have work to do. And we're getting, and it's because we are not a homogeneous white male rich party. We are diverse, with a diversity of views and diversity of communities. And so Jenny actually leads a training on that in So definitely look at our Mobilize link, because we do training on that. And I loved your format, because I think I'm shocked. I was shocked as I read chapters 3 and 4. And I think that just in that alone is a great summary. So thank you, Jackie. I'm going to share my screen if I can real quick. I'm going to share my screen just to highlight a few things that are coming up with Building Bridges. And I know Jenny will kind of pop some links in. I know she did a long view, but she'll put in some individual highlights here, because it is 9:07 my time, so 10:07 on the East Coast. So real quick, I just want to share this. We are working to finalize a guest for next week. Some things didn't work out, so we're going to plan B. But May 17th, Stephen Spalding from Common Cause will be joining us. So in 2 weeks, we're hoping we can get someone. I'll give you a little teaser in case it works out, but someone who is working in the Senate or is transitioning out, and so is in kind of that transition phase. So hopefully we can get that unique inside perspective. And then, of course, Monday, May 24th, the author of Kill Switch, Adam Gentleson, is joining us. So please make sure you're signed up for our last 3 weeks. And then one thing I really want to highlight, because there's a lot of new folks and we're so excited that you chose to be involved with Building Bridges through our book club, but there's many other things we do. We're looking for people who want to get more engaged and help in the various things that we do, or you can just sign up and show up to the other things that you're not fully aware of. So tomorrow we're having an event at 8 o'clock. So we would love for you to join us, and then you can just meet more of the Building Bridges team and hear about what we're doing. We have our Day of Action events, Wednesday movie nights, every other Friday writing letters. They're going to be having a live music performance at our next event coming up. So make sure you join us for that. And then on Saturdays, they play amazing fun games like Categories. They did that this last week. So fun ways to just create belonging as people write postcards and whatnot for our candidates. We are currently supporting Cammie Watkins, who's running for city council in my community and in my district. So send her positive vibes as her election is a week from tomorrow. And then we have training going on. So Jacqueline, you mentioned the need for framing. That conversation occurs every third Thursday from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern. It's a real talk series, say this, not that. But we also have other phenomenal training that Jenny and Kaz do as well. And then our monthly documentary that's coming up for May is Street Gang, How We Got to Sesame Street. And I don't know if you all know, but it centers around the civil rights movement and in the 1960s on the creation of Sesame Street. So if you want to learn more about that, highly encourage you to stop by. I just signed up over the weekend because I was definitely curious as I read the summary of Street Gang. So that's a quick wrap up of Building Bridges. Give us a follow on social media. If you are in any of those platforms, I'm going to let you all mute. And I promise you this week, I'm not going to get a kidney stone, and I will get the recording up on YouTube so that you can share with your friends, rewatch things if you want to or need to, and you should be able to unmute. And I hope you all have a great evening. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Thank
you all.
everybody.
Thank you
Thank
so
you for a great
much.
discussion, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
For coming.